It is 1725. You are somewhere in the Appalachian wilderness, though the word Appalachian means nothing to you because no one has drawn the maps yet. You have not seen another human face in 5 months. The temperature inside your one-room cabin is 14 degrees. You are awake because something outside is moving through the snow, and you are reaching for the flintlock rifle that may or may not fire when you need it to. Welcome to a day in the life of a mountain man 300 years ago. Most of the men who lived this life did not live it for long. The average career of a long hunter on the early 18th century American frontier was about 4 years, 4 winters. After that, something usually killed them. A bear, a fall, an infected cut, a native war party, and the slow rot of the lungs from breathing wood smoke in a sealed cabin every night for half a year. Or most often, something the journals from this period describe but never quite name. Something the men who made it home could not explain to the people who had not been out there. This is what one of those days looked like, from the moment you open your eyes to the moment you close them, assuming you get to close them at all. The year is 1725. The American colonies hug the Atlantic coast like a thin scab on the edge of a continent no European has truly mapped. Beyond the fall line of the rivers, the cartographers stop drawing. They write words like unknown and wilderness, and sometimes just leave the parchment blank. Out here in mountains that will one day be called Kentucky and Tennessee and West Virginia, there are no settlements. There are no roads. There are no doctors. There are native nations whose land this is and has always been. There are French trappers working their way down from the Great Lakes. And there are men like you, English or Scots-Irish or German, who walked west with a rifle and a bag of salt and a few iron traps and never walked back. You came out here for furs. Beaver pelts trade for the equivalent of about 12 modern dollars each, and a good season brings in 200 of them. That is enough money to live on for a year if you survive long enough to carry them home. You have been out here since the leaves turned in October. It is now February. You have 93 pelts. You have a cough you cannot get rid of. You have 1 good knife and 1 rifle and 3 teeth you can wiggle with your tongue. You are doing better than most. You wake before the sun because the cold wakes you. Your breath is frozen in your beard during the night, and the first thing you do is break the ice off your face with the back of your hand. The skin underneath is raw and split. You stopped feeling it 3 weeks ago. There are scabs on your lips that crack open every time you open your mouth, and you have learned not to open your mouth unless you have to. The fire died sometime in the night. You knew it would. There is no firewood inside the cabin because there is no room for firewood inside the cabin. The cabin is 6 feet by 8 feet, and most of that space is taken up by you, your traps, your pelts, and a pile of dried meat you do not want to think about too closely. The smell inside the cabin is a thing you stop noticing in November. A visitor would not be able to stand in here for more than a minute. The smell is wood smoke and old blood and tallow and the slow, sour reek of a man who has not washed since the first frost. You sit up. Something in your lower back makes a sound you have never heard a human body make before. You ignore it. You have been ignoring it for 2 weeks. Breakfast is whatever is closest. Today it is a strip of dried venison so hard you have to hold it in your mouth for a full minute before your teeth can break through it. 3 of those teeth are loose. You know what loose teeth mean. The old trappers called it the land scurvy. You need green things, and there are no green things in February in these mountains. And so you are going to lose teeth, and there is nothing you can do about it. The first one will probably come out before March. One you have already decided you will keep them in a small leather pouch the way the old men told you to, though you cannot remember why the old men said that. You pull on the boots. The boots are wet because the boots are always wet. You lost feeling in 2 of your toes in December. Last week, one of those toes turned black at the tip. You have not looked at it since. You will have to look at it tonight. You already know this. You are not ready. Outside, the world is white and silent and trying to kill you. You walk your trap line. The trap line is 12 miles long, and you walk it every other day. That is 12 miles through snow up to your knees, in clothes that have not been washed since October, and with a rifle that weighs 9 pounds and a knife at your hip that you have used for things you do not write about in the letters you are not writing to anyone. You do not write letters because there is no one to send them to and no one to deliver them. The nearest post road is 300 miles east of where you are standing. The first trap has a marten in it. Small animal, valuable fur. The marten is still alive. It has been in the trap for at least a day, and it has chewed through most of its own front leg trying to escape. It looks at you when you walk up. You kill it with the back of your knife. You do this without thinking, because if you think about it, you cannot do it. You learned that lesson in your first month out here, when you spent 20 minutes staring at a rabbit that was still breathing and finally had to close your eyes to finish the job. You do not close your eyes anymore. The second trap is empty. Something took the bait without triggering it. Something smart. A wolverine, maybe? You reset it and move on. The third trap is gone, just gone. The chain has been pulled out of the tree it was anchored to, and the snow around it is churned and dark. There are tracks, bear tracks, big ones. The bear should be hibernating. The bear is not hibernating. This is the kind of detail that 300 years from now, wildlife biologists will use to explain why some of these men simply vanished from the historical record. A bear that wakes hungry in February is not a bear. It is a problem with teeth. You do not follow the tracks. You are not stupid. When you are alone, and a man alone with a single-shot rifle does not chase a starving bear into the timber. You make a mental note of where the trap used to be, and you keep walking, and you check your rifle 3 times in the next half mile without realizing you are doing it. By midday you have not spoken a word because there is no one to speak to. You have not spoken a word in 6 days because the last time you spoke was when you found a frozen wolf curled up under a deadfall and said something out loud about it, and you cannot remember now what you said. This is the part the history books do not talk about: the silence. A human brain is not built for this. The men who came out here alone, the long hunters who stayed in the wilderness for months at a time without seeing another person, came back changed. The journals that survive from this period describe the same thing again and again. Men who forgot how to form full sentences. Men who started talking to trees and to their own rifles and to the bones of animals they had killed. Men who, when they finally walked back into a settlement after a long winter, could not handle the noise of 3 people in a room and had to leave. Men who flinched from a child's voice. Men who slept in the barn instead of the house. You are starting to understand this. Last week, you caught yourself having a full conversation with the cabin door. You were asking the door whether you should set the traps further south, where you had seen elk sign in the fall. The door, of course, did not answer, but you waited for it too. You waited a long time, and when you finally turned away, you felt rude, as if you had been impatient with someone who was thinking. You did not tell anyone about this because there is no one to tell. You will not tell anyone about it later either, when the snow finally melts. The men who come back from a winter alone learn quickly which stories you keep and which stories you bury, and the conversations with the door are the kind you bury. You keep walking. Around 2 in the afternoon, you find tracks that are not yours. Moccasins, 3 sets, moving fast in single file, heading northeast. They are maybe 6 hours old. You stand very still and you look at the trees, and you listen, and you do not move for a full 5 minutes. A bird calls somewhere to your left. You do not turn your head. You wait until the bird calls again before you let yourself breathe. You are on someone else's land. And you have always been on someone else's land. The Cherokee and the Shawnee and the Yuchi and the Catawba and a dozen other nations have hunted these mountains for thousands of years before any white man walked into them. and they are not happy about you being here. There are wars going on out here that the people in Boston and Philadelphia know nothing about. There are alliances and betrayals and revenge killings that will never be written down. And there is a quiet trade in scalps that nobody likes to talk about back east. In 1725, the bounty for a white trapper's scalp, paid by certain French agents working out of the Great Lakes, runs about the price of 3 good beaver pelts. The English, when they can, pay similar rates for the scalps of French trappers and their allies. Your scalp is worth 3 beavers to somebody. You think about this every time you find tracks. You think about it now. And then you turn around and walk a different route home, the long way, adding 2 extra miles to a day that already wanted to break you, because you are a long hunter and you are still alive. And those 2 things are not unrelated. When you finally make it back toward the cabin, the sun is already low and bleeding orange through the bare trees. You are carrying the marten, 2 squirrels you shot for the pot, and a piece of information you do not want. The information is this. There were tracks near your cabin, too. Different tracks, older, made sometime in the last day, before the morning's light snow had stopped falling. One man, alone, walking a slow circle around your cabin. He came within 10 feet of the door. He stopped there. He stood for a long time, or the snow is packed down where he stood. And then he walked away, north, into the timber, and his tracks disappear into ground too rocky to read. You do not know what this means. It could be another trapper checking to see if you were friend or threat. It could be a native scout doing the same thing for different reasons. It could be something else. Because out here, 300 years ago, in mountains that have not been mapped, and forests that have not been cut, and valleys that have not heard a church bell, there are stories that the trappers tell each other when they meet in the spring at the trading posts. Quiet stories, stories told over whiskey, late when the fire is low. The Algonquian peoples have a word for one of the things in those stories. The English trappers, when they speak the word at all, speak it carefully. The way you speak the name of a dog that bites. They say the woods up north have always had it. They say it walks on 2 legs but is not a man. They say it was a man once, and then it was alone too long, and then it was hungry, and then it was something else. They say you can hear it before you see it, and that if you see it, you have already lost. You do not believe in such things. You also notice that you are checking your rifle for the 4th time in an hour, and that you have not put your back to the open trees since you found the circle of footprints, and that you are walking the last half mile to your own cabin the way a man walks toward a sound he heard in the dark. You make it inside before full dark. You build the fire fast, because you have to, because if the fire dies before you fall asleep, you might not wake up. The wood is half frozen, and the smoke fills the cabin, and your eyes water, and you do not care. You feed it shavings until the flame catches, and then small sticks, and then the bigger pieces, and the orange light moves across the log walls and across the stack of pelts, and across the rifle leaning by the door. You take off the boots. You finally look at the toe. The toe is black up to the 2nd knuckle. The skin around it is yellow and shining. There is a smell you recognize from animals you have skinned, and recognizing it on your own foot does something to your stomach that you have to push down before you can think clearly. You know what this means. In a town with a doctor, this would be a small problem. A few coins, a small knife, a clean cloth. Out here, with 1 knife and 1 fire and no one to hold you down and no one to tell you when to stop, this is the kind of problem that men solve themselves. The men who solve it correctly live. The men who do not solve it correctly die slowly over the course of about 10 days, and the dying is not gentle, and the journals from this period describe it with a flatness that makes the skin crawl 3 centuries later. You will solve it tomorrow. Tonight, you cannot face it. You wrap the foot in a strip of cloth that is not as clean as you would like, and you eat one of the squirrels half raw because you cannot wait for it to cook properly, and you lie down on the pile of furs that is your bed. You do not sleep right away. You lie there, and you listen. You hear the fire. You hear the wind. You hear somewhere far off a sound that might be a wolf and might be something else. You hear the cabin settling against the cold, the way the logs talk to themselves when the temperature drops. And then you hear, just for a moment, what sounds like footsteps in the snow outside. Slow ones, heavy ones, walking the same circle the morning's tracks walked. You wait. You do not move. You do not breathe. Your hand finds the rifle without your eyes. The footsteps do not come again. Maybe they were never there. 6 days without speaking does things to a man's ears as well as his mind, and the old trappers had a saying about this. They said that after a certain point in a long winter alone, the line between what is in the woods and what is in your head stops being a line at all. They said the worst part is not that you start to imagine things. The worst part is that you stop being sure which things you are imagining. You close your eyes. You do not know if you sleep. The fire burns down. The cabin gets colder. Somewhere outside, the wind moves through the trees, and the trees move against each other, and the sound they make is almost, but not quite, the sound of a voice. This was a Tuesday. Not a special day. Not a story. Just a Tuesday in the life of a man who chose, or was forced by circumstance, to walk into the American wilderness 300 years ago and try to survive it. He had 100 more days like this ahead of him before the spring would come and the snow would melt and he could try to make it back to a settlement to sell what he had killed. But he had a black toe that was going to require a knife and a fire and a kind of courage most modern people will never need to find. He had 300 miles of country between him and the nearest doctor. He had a cough he could not shake. He had a rifle that might or might not fire when the moment came. He had 3 teeth he could wiggle with his tongue, and he had stopped wiggling them because the wiggling had started to make him sad. We do not know his name because most of these men did not write their names down, and the ones who did wrote them in journals that were lost when they died alone in cabins like this one, and the journals were eaten by mice or burned for warmth by the next man who found them. What we know is this: for every long hunter who made it home, 2 did not. The average career of a man in this trade was 4 winters. We know that some of them, when they finally walked out of the mountains in spring, never spoke about what they had seen out there. We know that some of them, after a season or 2 back in town, turned around and walked back into the timber and were never heard from again. We know that the men who survived the longest were not the strongest or the fastest. They were the ones who could be alone without breaking, and almost no one can be alone without breaking, which is why almost none of them survived very long. 300 years later, we put their faces on whiskey bottles and beef jerky packages. We use the phrase mountain man to sell beard oil and hiking boots. We have made the life look romantic. It was not romantic. It was a Tuesday like this one, and then another one. And then, eventually, it was the last one, and the snow covered whatever was left, and the woods went quiet again, and the next spring somebody else walked west with a rifle and a bag of salt because the beaver pelts were still worth $12 apiece, and a man could make a year's wages in a season if he was lucky, and almost no one was.